into the wave of change where I am interviewing leaders who inspire action, sharing their stories, dropping those tips, and giving you some gems to take with you. Make some waves with a share, like, comment if you dare. If you are catching this replay, you know what to do. Hit hashtag replay. My name is TammyRenee, and I am here to help you make a change and take action in your life. And today we are talking about addressing trauma in the workplace for your success. Drop some waves in the comments and let's welcome Anita Roach, author and founder of Safe and Sound Workplace Alliance. Hello, how are you?
Hi, TammyRenee, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so happy to have you here with me today. So why don't you go ahead and just kind of tell us a little bit more about yourself and your business to start us off here.
Hi, so I'm so thrilled to be here. I am Anita Roach. I am focused on creating understanding for leaders and individuals around how our natural trauma responses that are universal to all humans are impacted by how our workplace is set up. So we as individuals have systems and souls, and our organizations have systems and souls. And so how do we bridge the gap between that to create healthy, trauma-informed workplaces that allow our humanity in? Because that system piece is where we're really missing a beat right now. We are very focused on the individual and building resilience. However, there's only so much resilience a human system can have if every day they're getting into the workplace and it's an unhealthy place to be. So my work focuses as an educator, speaker, strategic advisor for leaders to really understand how to create psychosocially sound practices and policies that lead to psychological safety for our employee success, but also the business case for this work is incredible. And so it's also for organizational success. So it's a win-win for everybody. I say it's a 1 + 1 = 3 formula. When we focus on the worker and the workplace, we impact the world.
Mm-hmm. So you're not really addressing the emotional person per se. You're bringing in the tools to help identify these things that may be holding people back from because of the trauma. Am I hearing that correct?
A little. We are whole humans, right? So I have a concept of the whole human, that is who we're innately designed to be, how our brains neurally process, and our lived experience creates our whole human. Mm-hmm. Our systems and how we have always traditionally worked is that we expect the human employee to check their humanity at the door, which we know is impossible. Mm-hmm. And our systems are set up for that. And what we don't understand is, one, trauma is universal. It is not a respecter of people or privilege. Yes, some people groups have more exposure to traumatic events, but as we saw with the pandemic, as we're seeing now with all the chaos in the world, trauma is collective, trauma is individual. There's different types of trauma. There's combat trauma, which everybody assumes is the main type of trauma, is our esteemed veterans. But there's climate trauma. We're seeing that in the fires and in the hurricanes. There's childhood trauma. There's community and cultural trauma related to mass violence, to intergenerational and epigenetic traumas that we see, to that really, and then crisis trauma. You know, we've gotten in a car accident, somebody has abused us somehow on a more like one-off thing. So all of these traumas are impacting each of us differently, and we have physiological systems in our body. Our trauma response. Trauma lives in our body. Trauma is cellular. That's how epigenetic and intergenerational trauma gets into our systems, right? It's multiple generations once that marker is turned on. And yet we treat it often like it is an emotional impulse or a behavioral choice. When you've had a traumatic experience, like I have complex PTSD from a very challenging childhood and early adulthood, and I've done tremendous work to heal that trauma. But the response, the physiological response, still lives in my body because that's a human response. It's part of how we are all designed. So no matter how much work we're doing, we could be addressing trauma weekly, daily, in therapy and meditation practices, etc. But if we're entering a space that does not understand our humanity, does not understand the impacts of trauma, is not trauma informed, that work, you could be the Dalai Lama himself, I say, and that human response, that human systemic response to a perceived threat is going to take hold and appear to be a behavioral choice or an emotional response. And so we're doing lots of work on the individual side to heal, to build resilience, etc. But if we don't address the system side of the organizations and the institutions where we learn and earn, we're going to be in a never-ending cycle.
Right. So essentially you're saying humanizing the workplace.
Yes.
Humanizing. Okay, I got you now. It's clicking for me in my head because, and while you were speaking about that, you know, I did go through a phase where that's where I was focused on was my trauma, but. And like you said, you never really get over the trauma. You learn to manage it and you learn to not let it take over, right?
Right.
But what I have realized is sometimes the work I do will bring that back up to me and I'll fall back into bad habits of getting frustrated, not feeling understood, not feeling like, you know, kind of feeling like I'm out of the box, even though I know I'm capable, but my work, what I'm getting for you is not it's set up to help me fail.
Well, and again, because it's not an emotional choice, because it's not, it's involuntary, it's a physiological system response. Our brain says, I perceive this threat. It could be a real threat. You see a car coming at you, let's say, or it could be a perceived threat based on past experience. Your body takes over, your brain takes over the way our brain is designed, and our human system has not evolved at the same rate that our external systems, our work systems, our education systems have evolved. So we still respond to those perceived and incoming threats as if we were being chased by a giant dinosaur, right? It's the same response, and that is an immediate physiological involuntary response. Is it important to have tools to help us regulate our emotional systems after the trauma response starts? absolutely, the individual has responsibility for that piece of it. If we are meditating every night, 5 p.m. till 9 p.m., and we're getting good sleep and we're doing all those things, and Monday through Friday at 8 a.m., we're entering in to systems that don't support or understand how our humanness works, that all goes out the door. So no progress is getting made in our individual ability to handle that. And the frustrations and things that you've talked about are part of that involuntary autonomous nervous system response that we have, that is all physiological. So we have the 4 trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And so those are built into every human being's system. And when that perceived threat comes in, one of those 4 or a combination is going to show up, especially if you have significant past trauma. Mm-hmm. And so if you're, I use examples like the employee who just seems to complain all the time, right? Is she just a Karen? Or is there something in your organizational system that is activating the fight response? You know, is the person who doesn't seem to participate in meetings, are they underperforming or are they in freeze response? Is the person who takes a ton of breaks or calls in sick all the time really a horrible employee, or is there something in your organizational system that is activating their flight response? And
so how do you address this with the work environment? Like, how do you tell us more about that?
So we have to really look at our systems, right? I talk about, I have a trauma-informed whole human change management process, because we see this even right now on the global stage. We have some glimmer of awareness, something sparks our interest, or we think we've identified the problem, and we move immediately into action. That in and of itself is trauma-inducing for most people. Because there's
right into action?
Right, from a glimmer of awareness right into action for your employees, etc., is because it moves too fast, it's often chaotic, it is often not well communicated, it doesn't provide stability and a firm foundation, especially if you're already on shaky ground organizationally because you don't have the right policies and procedures in place. And it creates change fatigue, which is another form of, trauma-inducing behavior, because if you haven't done the other steps, which I'll talk about in a minute, you're probably not going to adopt and assimilate those new changes because they're not working. And then you have another awareness and you move straight into action, and we're on a perpetual cycle where a trauma-informed whole human approach to change and evaluating your systems is to have that glimmer of awareness, move into a place of acknowledgement where you really try to understand where the real problem lies, not what the surface problem is. Then move into advocacy, what I call advocacy, which is employee stakeholder engagement, the communication piece, explaining the why and the how, moving slowly into then the next core phase, which is agreements, where everybody is clear on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what their role is. And when we have clear agreements, then we can have accountability. When there's no clear agreements on how we're going to behave, what the expectations are, what each person's role is, role clarity in what your job is, or role clarity in the change. When we don't have that, confusion ensues. People don't feel safe, confident, able to understand what they're supposed to do, that's where things kind of go off the rails. But if we have clear agreements, then we can uphold accountability.
Okay.
Then we can move into the deep work of analyzing and creating action plans to then move in to how do we adopt behaviors, how do we adopt change, how do we assimilate it into our systems. So it's a measured approach, it's a meaningful approach, but it's an approach that gets us to the end results each and every one of us wants.
So are these like individually customized for each person, or is this like a full system generic where you have all the things in place but everybody just following this? Or it's like, say, Susie, who doesn't come back from break on time all the time, you customize. First, you're going to do at the beginning, before they even get hired. I just want to make sure I got this in my head right. Before you even get hired, you're going to go through this assessment, it sounds like. And this assessment will help them get a clear idea of what's expected of them, open up the communication. And that way, when they're feeling this type of way, they're able to come to their boss and be like, I'm struggling with understanding this. Can you help me understand this a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's two principles at play here. One is psychological safety, which Amy Edmondson, who has done amazing research on this, and this is creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to make mistakes, to take risks, etc. Mm-hmm. There's another concept, which is where a lot of my work focuses, which is the psychosocial aspects of it. And this is, do we have policies, practices, and procedures in place that lead to that sense of psychological safety so people can speak up, etc. And so we need both. All of this is both and. Just like your original question, is this individualized or is this organizationally? And it's both. We need the solid foundation of the correct policies, practices, and procedures in place so that if we recognize that we have an individual who needs something customized or is experiencing something, we can act accordingly. Mm-hmm. And it's just like role clarity, if you have, and accommodations, etc. If you have a disabled employee, if you have, an employee who is more of an engineer, you're not going to put them in a creative role, right? And vice versa. You got to have the right people in the right seats in the right places, but you need a firm foundation for them all to sit. Right. We don't have that across the board right now. And so this is not about employers, organizations, institutions becoming fixers of broken people. Mm-hmm. It's about fixing broken systems so all people can be safe and do their best work.
Right. I get it. Yes. It's always available for whoever needs it.
Yes. It's not Susie's having this response. We need to figure out what's going on in her personal life. That's not what this work is. This work is, how do we educate everybody in our organization, including our policies and procedures, to understand our humanity, so that we are creating an environment where the employee succeeds and has well-being and the organization succeeds and has overall well-being. Mm-hmm. Because we need to have both.
Yes. And I can see this being such a value in the upper level management and supervisors and things like that, who have those employees who may be having some things they're dealing with but not sharing them. So they're they're messing up at work because of the subconscious kicking in and making them go left when they're supposed to be going right. But having that open door policy, which is not really an open door policy, like it's not really meant for that. But it sounds like what you are creating here allows for that open door to really be open,
right? And it's creating expectations. So I have what I call the 7 agreements of a safe and sound workplace.
Okay.
And they range from allowing autonomy and expression in not making everybody fit into their particular box, to a very important one that I would say is probably, if we had to look at one, which is creating expectations around being cognizant of how you may impact other people. So, for example, I tell this story a lot. I tend to work in very male-dominated industries. As a person who has survived multiple sexual abuses, as have 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 men have been exposed to sexual violence, being cognizant means not having 6 very tall men towering over my desk, demanding that I take on work that I already was working 90 plus hours a week. How do I take on more work while I'm running a team, while I'm doing all these things, and them not hearing me, not giving me voice, not giving me choice, being aggressive in their stance, in their tone, my no not meaning no one more time in my life. How? So if they had been cognizant of trauma response, of the sheer numbers of people in our organizations who, like I said, 1 in 2 women, 1 in 3 men. The latest studies, which are a little old, show that 70% of us have experienced at least one traumatic event. Most recent studies show 37% of us have 4 or more of the adverse childhood experiences that lead to greater risk of physical and mental health issues. 37%. And so that is a large part of our organizations who have significant trauma. 1/3, greater than 1/3. If leaders, individuals, our entire employee base understood and were cognizant of how their tone, physical positioning, words, language, a hand slammed on a desk even might create impact in somebody's physiological system.
Yes.
If rules around that, if we had expectations around that, if we had changed the social norm in not rewarding aggressive behavior as good leadership, we could make huge difference just from that one thing.
Yes.
And then upholding accountability, which is another of the 7 agreements, when we have those clear expectations, when we have rules, and we have a process and procedure in place to uphold accountability, when those new healthy norms are not adhered to, those 2 things together are not costly, they're not time consuming, and they can create ripple effects, not just in our organizations, but in people's home lives, in our community. That's why I say it's a 1 + 1 = 3.
Yes. And so it really is not jumping to a conclusion or a judgment of someone, and really being aware that everybody is different. Everyone has had different experience and everyone responds differently.
Yes.
Because if I knew, we're going to use the aggressive man thing, and let's just say I was in an abusive relationship, right? If I'm working at a desk and a man slams on the table, I can see how that will trigger me and move me from this productive work person to now I'm shutting down and shutting back.
Yes. And
it
productivity.
Has with my work. It just has to do with the environment of the workplace.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't have to do with your emotions or a behavioral choice. It has to do with a physiological system design in how we're all designed. Every human has trauma response built into their human system.
Right.
And their nervous system response. It is not a choice to go into trauma response. It's not a choice to flee. It's not a choice to fight all the time. It's not a choice to freeze. It's not a choice to fawn, which we often do in the workplace because we can't fight and we can't flee because we need a paycheck. So fawning is what often leads to our burnout. It's characterized by chronic people-pleasing, perfectionism, workaholism, appeasing and pleasing, overachievement. I am a fawner by nature. It led to significant burnout, health issues that I still deal with. That part of my past is part of what made me focus on this work, first in addressing my own experiences and then focusing on how this was showing up in teams that I was working with, leaders who were struggling, maybe a merger and acquisition situation that created real damage in one of the firms, things like that. And I started to see it wasn't just me, it was a systemic issue. Both in the human systems, because we don't have control of some of these systems in our bodies as much as we try, and a systemic issue in our organizations and our institutions. We see this in schools. We see this, in any established system that has tried to homogenize, right, for supposed effectiveness and efficiency and all of that. But you mentioned productivity. The reality is that studies show that these unsafe workplaces show a over 40% decrease in productivity. We see a decrease in innovation. We see an increase in turnover. We see an increase in healthcare costs because of chronic illnesses and things like that the employee is experiencing, but it impacts the bottom line. Right. And that's why addressing it is not about the people or the employees or, all the things that many leaders get frustrated about. There is a value. Now, we shouldn't be focused there. We should be able to focus on the value that having whole humans and all their great experiences bringing to our organizations and the world. But if we have to look at the bottom line, which many people focus there, we need to look at. This is costing a lot of money. In fact, Gallup says that disengaged employees are costing the world $8.8 trillion annually in lost profit. $8.8 trillion. So imagine if we focused there instead of, some of the things we're currently focusing on. Right. Across the globe, particularly here.
Right. And I can't even, I can, but I'm going to say I can't, but I can't even imagine having that resource for those people who don't even know that they are triggered by these things and subconsciously they are acting out or, as they say, being rebellious, even though they're not meaning to. Just subconsciously they are, because there's this block that is stopping them from communicating to the other person. Right. This bothers me because of this. I don't understand this because of this. Can you break this down a little bit more for me? Right. And so instead you rebel or retreat to yourself, and it's unfortunate because you can have like great people who are wonderful workers who could bring your company's fortunes, right? But because of the environment, they're losing out.
Right. And again, the employee is losing out, and that's rippling into their home lives and their communities. The organization is missing out because, again, when we don't feel safe to make mistakes, to share ideas, to take a risk, the company lacks opportunity for innovation and creativity and new ideas. And so it's a win-win for everybody if we can, one, become aware that trauma is impacting us. I often hear, well, that's only a couple of people. We can't focus time, resource. No, it is not only a couple of people.
Not after what we've been through, and from the pandemic to now. They're so deep in us.
Right. Gen Z, right, who we often hear are lazy in their problems. And let's talk about that particular generation. They come in, if we only look at the collective aspects of that generation in the United States, because again, it's different places, culture has an impact, etc. But they grew up in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So the childhood aspects of that, including the stress of their parents, but we're not even looking at parental impacts yet. So the stress of the pandemic, the negative impacts of social media, including increased exposure to predators, increased exposure to bullying. We look at the fact that they, starting in kindergarten, are exposed to active shooter drills regularly in their schools.
Mm-hmm. And there are nice leaders.
Yeah, and increased food and housing insecurity, increased social unrest, increased cultural and community things, increased climate traumas, again, the fires, the hurricanes, etc. So before we even look at how are mom and dad, is the child neurodivergent, LGBTQIA, a person of a person of color, you know,
any kind of diversity can bring this on.
Well, because there's intersectionality between trauma and the different things that make us uniquely human, right? That's why I talk about our natal design. Who are we genetically designed to be, right? You know, are we female? Are we male? Are we trans? Are we white? Are we a person of color? You know, the genetic ancestry, not our social constructs of race and gender and culture and ethnicity, but just the genetic aspects that we have no control over have an impact. Then you have all the social constructs around that have their own impacts, but there's intersectionality to the things that make us uniquely human and our traumatic experiences. So that's where the concept of the whole human evolved from my work, because we're all different. Right. There's not one of us. I'm the mother of twins, identical twins, and they're not even the same, because they have their genetic design, they have how their brains work, and they have their lived experiences. And as their lived experiences diverged, so did how they behave in the world. So we're all different, and yet we box everybody down, especially in our learning organizations, in our workplace organizations, and we're missing out because of it, and we're harming people.
What they say, when you assume what?
Exactly. That is the whole world would be better if we just stopped making those assumptions. But, and then you have the intergenerational aspects that I mentioned earlier, where, people who have been marginalized for centuries, that trauma passes down. And that has some aspects to do with genetic ancestry, color, being a woman, etc. But we know, there's amazing research on the ancestors of Holocaust survivors and trauma. And so, even the people we think are less trauma impacted or more privileged may be experiencing the impacts of their genetic traumatic history. And so, instead of making assumptions that this is a this and this is a this and this is a this, we each are human. We bring these multiple factors into the world we engage with and respond to. And how do we create the best foundation for everyone and everything to thrive?
So you are a believer that trauma is passed down through our genes.
Well, I'm not a believer. The research shows that genetically, once it gets turned on, it can pass down I've seen 3 generations, which is a lot, to 7 generations.
Wow.
So, when we look at unfortunate things in our history that have harmed many people, people of color, people who have migrated here under duress and their families, all of that impacts future generations because certain parts of our DNA turn on when trauma has been experienced.
Oh my God, now I want to go do some research. But, I am biracial, right? So I grew up with my white mom, and half of my mom's family is racist. But I didn't grow up with my dad really. But because of how I grew up, and I was born in 70, so, I'm in that yes, was allowed to be interracial relationships, right? I actually never found my place. I never really found where I fit in anywhere. And so that made me, what you say, fawn trauma, a people pleaser, because I didn't know where to fit in. So I just pleased everyone, but I didn't let them get close to me.
Right. So you probably had a combination of external fawning and internal fleeing, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm glad you broke that down for me. Now I'm aware, and I can bring that to my workplace.
and again, we need to personally be aware of how we're showing up in the world and the why, because as we heal future generations.
Yes.
And we have to be aware that we can do we could be in therapy 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, but if the other 8 hours we're going into a workplace or a school or whatever that doesn't understand how our humanness works, doesn't understand safety and how that interacts with human, how we're designed physiologically,
right.
Then we're just creating new trauma. New trauma, but also re-traumatizing people. And so that's where the systems work is so important.
Yes, I love that. And I just want to share this for a fun fact, but maybe about, my grandson is 15 months. So when my daughter got pregnant with her, I had this experience, which is very interesting based on what you're talking about. The same month that I found out my daughter was pregnant, my dad passed away, and I got in a car accident.
Oh, okay.
Right? But right after, when I got into that car accident, I had this overwhelmed thought, feeling, sensation, vision, whatever you want to call it, say to me, your curse has been broken.
Wow.
And it was interesting because he's the first boy. My grandson's the first boy. I have all daughters, grew up with sisters. And my dad died the same month that I found out she was having him.
Wow.
And I literally got this, and I said, I feel like some kind of generational curse or trauma or something has been broken. I could never put my finger on it, but I did get this I got this overwhelmed thought through me that said that to me.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's, you know, things have changed since then. And so I know that I've been working on breaking some of these trauma curses. So, you know, hopefully I know there's still some more in there, but I love the fact that you're providing this for companies. So if there's an employee who knows they suffer from this trauma in their workplace and they have not been able to voice it or really even recognize it, but maybe they're listening to this and now they'd be like, oh, that's why I do that at work. Mm-hmm. What advice would you give them?
So I think one, knowledge is power, right? So understanding that it's one, not unique to you. You're not broken. Trauma response is, again, a physiological, human aspect. We all have it. How much it shows up, what we perceive as threats that maybe somebody else doesn't, has to do with a lot of factors, including what we've experienced in the world and even what our ancestors have experienced. But understanding how you're showing up, making sure to pass that knowledge on, right? Because awareness of this trauma's invisible impact in our organizations is the first step. Mm-hmm. We can't fix anything until we really understand it. And so helping people understand, and that doesn't mean you have to disclose everything, your whole life story, right? Mm-hmm. Because the world isn't necessarily ready for that. But becoming an advocate for healthy workplaces, for safe and sound workplaces, is a big part of that, right? How do you have conversations around being human? How do you have conversations around experiences? Now, I do think breaking the silence on this, where it's appropriate, is powerful. That's why I tell my story. That's why I'm not ashamed to say I have complex PTSD or that I've been abused, or different parts of my story that I share in various settings, because breaking the silence and helping people understand that you're not broken, you're not alone. But this work is really not about fixing individuals. It's not about therapizing. It's not about any of that. I make that very clear, because this is not going to happen overnight. Right. I wish it would, but it won't. So how do we, again, take measured, meaningful moves forward? That's the same, and I talk about the same thing for the individuals as I do for the organization. Once you have that glimmer of awareness, don't jump into immediate action to, bring your whole story to your boss, right? Have that awareness, acknowledge your part, acknowledge what might not be working in the workplace, become an advocate for change, share what you've learned, share resources, share knowledge, start to work towards how do we create agreements, be a role model for what trauma-informed whole human care looks like. So, be a role model of what those 7 agreements are. Mm-hmm. Become the change you want to see. And when we do that, then the ripple starts to, move out. If you're a leader in an organization, being that role model is key. Mm-hmm. Leaders are people. We often forget that. But when you're a leader, you have to model what you expect people to do, not have a policy, and then do something completely different.
Right. Well, we can't do that.
Which we see, unfortunately. So we want to,
we're just doing what we see.
Just those little recognitions,
So really, if you are someone who is struggling and you recognize, oh my God, maybe that's where my struggle is coming from. Or if you're a leader and be like, oh my God, maybe that's the problem in the organization. You don't really want to jump into change.
Yep.
You want to educate yourself. You want to get knowledgeable what this means, how this works. Contact Anita and find out about those 7 agreements.
Right.
Because I'm sure they are set up in a way to progress you through the process.
Yeah. And again, if I would say 2 things, because I know we're getting very close to time. I think you and I could talk about this for days. If we started with that, being cognizant of how, we might be impacting people,
yes,
having accountability and agreements. And I say, start with the compassionate why, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're seeing, I'm just going to pick on you for a second.
That's fine.
If you see TammyRenee, all of a sudden is not participating as much as she would. Ask yourself why has something happened? What might be going on, and then find the right ways to ask the compassionate why to TammyRenee. I'm a perfect example of this. If an organization I had worked for had simply asked me, Anita, why are you willing to work 7 days a week, 20 hours a day for our company?
Mm-hmm.
It could have changed things for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's one question. Why?
Mm-hmm. Why? I mean, I didn't even go that far to think about that.
Right.
Because employers like, oh yeah, she wants to work. Let her work.
And she has created change, and we're more successful because of it. So why ask?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But in the meantime, burnout is happening.
Burnout, trauma response, especially because I ended up having a boss change that created really unhealthy situations for me. Right, because that change set off a whole litany of experiences for me that were reminiscent of a traumatic past. And so then my fawning turned into fawn and fight. And then it was, well, why can't you just be the good Anita? I don't know. So that then triggered more behaviors, right? And illness and chronic illness and still trying to push through to appease and please. And, it was just exhausting and everything I was breaking down. And that one compassionate why.
Mm-hmm.
Anita, we have never seen anybody work this hard for our company. Tell us why.
Right. And that's what I was going to say. It's going to have you step back and ask yourself that too, because you probably didn't really understand. You was just doing what felt right for you at that time.
Involuntarily.
Yes.
Because my body was like, work is a threat. I have to please everybody. I have to make sure everybody's okay. I'm to blame for everything. And so the more that message got perpetuated back, the harder I worked. I can fix things. I had messages as a kid. If you only did this, or you are the reason this good thing happened, or you're the reason this horrible thing happened. And so I had this message And so unhealthy places were feeling like a threat. And so I can fix it. And how I can fix it, I can work harder. I can do everything everybody wants. I can stay quiet. I can do all these things and just that hamster wheel. And again, the compassionate why of Anita, why?
Right. Oh my God, that's so powerful.
Why would somebody work 20 hours a day for our company?
Yeah, that's powerful. That's very powerful. Very powerful. Because I just think about when I used to be a workaholic and all I did was work. And I can see how that can be very powerful. Thank you for that.
So I would say, be aware, be cognizant, and ask yourself and others the compassionate why.
Yes. Thank you so much for your great information. And this is such a unique perspective, way to approach companies and organizations. So I love that about you for that.
Thank you.
So why don't you go ahead and give us any last remarks and share how we can find you, or if you have anything you want to talk about and offer, you can do that also.
Okay. Well, I would say my last remark again is we're all human. If you're having trauma response, that doesn't mean you're broken or you're bad. I think that's important. I think if you're a leader who has the ability to create change in your organization, one, pick up my book. I think it will help. Because all of the things I talked about today, the 7 agreements, the safe and sound change management, leading as a role model, and even just what is trauma and how does it show up. That's a big part of this book, is just the educational piece of that. So I think arm yourself however you feel comfortable doing that with how this is a universal thing that all your employees and yourself may experience at times, is our first line of defense for creating change. If that's through my book, I would love that. If not, it is starting to get talked about. It is fairly new, as you pointed out. This is not how we talk about these things normally. So, and ask the compassionate whys. Just ask them of yourself and ask them of others in the right way, because we don't want to be re-traumatizing. Right. We don't want to be trauma-inducing. We certainly don't want to be trauma weaponizing, which also is happening in our world, unfortunately. So be thoughtful of those things. Understand how people physiologically are designed to have these trauma responses. They're not poor performers. They're not rebellious. They're not bad people. They're not being emotional, or are they being behavioral challenges? It could very well be a physiological, what they call an amygdala hijack, where your brain takes over certain parts. One part of your brain overrides another, and your brain is not operating the way it needs to in that moment. I think from an offer standpoint, check out the Safe and Sound Workplace Alliance at safeandsound.work. I have a course there for individuals that kind of covers these first parts and really arms people with the knowledge they need. You can go to my website, anitaroach.com, and you can download the business case for a safe and sound workplace, which gives all the statistics that I shared in a nice presentation you can take to your boss or other leaders or your board, already done for you to make that easy, and reach out.
Yes, I already know someone I'm forwarding this to. It's not my boss, but I do know someone I want to forward this to.
Right. That's how we create change, right? We have conversations. We talk about the hard things. we bring our humanness the best we can, and then we share that knowledge with other people.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Remember,
thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. But remember, if you need to have more information on this, you're going to go to, what's that website again?
If you go to my name, AnitaRoach.com, that will send you to all the places that I have and tools I have available for you.
And that's all you have to remember, AnitaRoach.com.
And it's a funny name, so it's not hard to forget either.
Right.
It sounds like I need a roach.
Oh, Lord.
It's been my name my whole life. I know you were having one of your episodes, you were talking about a name that was hard to pronounce. And I was like, oh, yes. Well, my name is a funny name. So
yes,
almost 57 years with this name. So I've learned to have a sense of humor about it.
Right. That's cool. That's after, working through all that trauma, it now becomes funny.
If we don't laugh, we don't survive. So
yeah. So thank you so much, and we will see you. I will see you next week, maybe for a special announcement. So make sure you come back and check me out. We got some things that's gonna be changing around here. So we will talk to you next week. Bye.
Breaking chains, rearranging every arc. TammyRenee's